Welcome back, DIVEBOMB IndyCar podcast for the first of a very special two-parter reviewing the 2 days of IndyCar Content Day, just like we did last year as a bonus episode. This one's a fully fledged podcast episode with a few extra bits in there which have popped up throughout the day, and then we'll be back tomorrow for part 2 of this episode, just reviewing the drivers that we're going to see tomorrow. So we spoke to 16 drivers today, we've got 13 tomorrow, so 16 drivers to speak about. Plenty of topics, plenty of discussion that we're going to have over the next hour and a half. If you're a new listener to the DIVEBOMB IndyCar podcast, welcome. It's great to have you listening to the show. If you don't know me, I'm Dan Jones, accredited IndyCar journalist for DIVEBOMB Motorsports magazine, joined by my fellow journalist, Archie, also writing for DIVEBOMB Motorsport magazine. Been a long day, but how are you coping after, 10 hours in front of a computer screen?
Yeah, it's been tiring. I think 9 hours or so today from, 1 p.m. over with us in the UK. It started at about 8 a.m., I think, local time in Indy, and then ended at 10 p.m. UK time, so around 5 p.m. in the evening over in Indy. So it was a long day sat in front of a laptop screen, but it's always good fun kind of catching up with the drivers for the first time after the off-season. I always kind of hope almost that it was a couple of weeks later, because we're still at this point as we record 45 days on from kind of when cars hit the track for the first time in St. Pete. So there's still a little while to go after this, but it's a nice IndyCar fix. Gives us loads of stories to bring to you over kind of the next month or so before the season does get underway. But it's just good to see the drivers, some of them sporting new race suits, new colours, new sponsors, some with new teams, and all with different kind of stories to tell.
So if you're not familiar with the podcast, myself and Archie are both based in the UK. So this is a British podcast covering the American series of IndyCars, I'm sure you all know. So a bit of a different perspective, a little bit of a perspective over the pond, but albeit we have to join everything via Zoom because of being a 20-year-old with not much money, it's quite difficult to get to America for some content days. But we will give you the very best we can, including all reaction to all 16 press conferences that we had throughout the course of the day. But we're actually going to start off with some other news which was announced today, which was the Fox Sports IndyCar booth lineup for 2025. We obviously found out towards the end of last year that they would be taking the rights from NBC in a multi-year contract. We'll get onto the advertising and that sort of side just after we do this little segment. But and that's the booth. Townsend Bell and James Hinchcliffe are returning. But as we knew, Lee Diffie wouldn't be, and he's been replaced by Will Buxton. I'm sure a very familiar name to many of you, obviously British. That's what we love to see. He is the main presenter for F1 TV, has been for a very, very long time. Prior to that, he did a bit of work in IndyCar almost a decade ago, well over a decade ago. But he's going to be the play-by-play commentator, the same role that Diffie took. So Buxton has done this about 12, 13 years ago. So it's been a while for Buxton. He's been doing, as I said, more of the presenting side in recent years. But he's given a new opportunity in a play-by-play role, which is really exciting. Me and Archie were about 10 years old when he was last in a commentary booth commentating play-by-play, so we can't really give you much insight into what he was like as a commentator. But from the clips we've seen on Twitter, he seems pretty energetic, pretty fun. Would you agree to some extent?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I went and kind of, when this was first reported, I went and sought out some clips, and I was really impressed. Obviously, his recent experience, I think he posted earlier because he is leaving F1 TV upon this announcement. He's been there for, I think he said 7 years. I could be wrong, but a long while. And he's a figure that kind of F1 and motorsport fans internationally will be very, very familiar with. I mean, he has a following that is greater than essentially every IndyCar driver and is kind of equivalent to the following of the series itself on social media. So that's a massive name that's being brought to the booth, and obviously a really renowned name for all the right reasons. And I think the way that the booths work over in the US and with IndyCar, it's not like you would say be used to in F1 where it is firmly a lead commentator. The lead play-by-play commentator almost is like an anchor for the program, and that's what Buxton's so good at, as well as obviously having that experience in the past with commentary. So I think it's fantastic. I think it's a fantastic kind of statement of intent from Fox as well to have prized him away from a role working for Formula One, regarded obviously as the pinnacle of motorsport by everyone, the most popular form of motorsport. He works for that in-house television kind of brand company. I don't know exactly how to put it, but to have been prized away by Fox is a real statement of intent. And I think if you could credit NBC for one thing that they did during their time with IndyCar in particular, they got it right with the booth. I think having Townsend Bell and James Hinchcliffe, there was great chemistry between them. They didn't always agree, but I think that was part of the fun of it. They're both super, super knowledgeable, insightful, and I think to upset the apple cart too much with changing it around too much would have probably not been a great move. So I'm really pleased that they have kind of stuck with that. Hinchcliffe has some experience with Buxton from F1 TV, so they are yet to announce kind of the pit lane reporters. There are names such as Jack Harvey, Ryan Hunter-Ray being touted. You've probably obviously got the likes of Kevin
Lee.
Yep. So all familiar names. Obviously Hunter-Ray, Harvey, not necessarily seen them in those roles, but Charlie Kimball, he's done the co-commentary for Indy Next in recent years. I find it hard to see not having Kevin Lee or someone there. You've got Jamie Little, who's very prominent in the NASCAR world, who is reported to be involved. She was there at the content days. So a lot of excitement in that regard. And that's before we get into kind of what the drivers have been saying all day about Fox in such glowing terms.
I mean, yeah, Buxton isn't a conventional choice. There's always like the Alan Bessick, Adam Alexander rumours for ages, but they've chosen Buxton, so it's a bit left field, but it's a big statement because he's a popular guy and he can't come very cheap. So they're going all guns blazing. It's nice to have a bit of continuity with Bell and Hinchcliffe alongside him. So it's good that we've got some familiarity there. It's not a completely all new dynamic. There is still an existing dynamic there, just alongside the new Will Buxton, who, as I said, might take a while to get into play-by-play, but that's fine. He's got where it's a bit different when you've got two co-commentators on the American side of things. It makes life a little bit easier. And there should be quite a good dynamic in the booth. So, as you said, pit lane reporters, etc., still to be announced, and the Indy 500 will probably likely be a bit of a different format, but that's pretty cool. Yeah, it's pretty cool booth lineup, which I think generally there's not really many complaints about. So, getting Will Buxton away from F1 is pretty significant. And then I'll briefly touch on this as well, just because it's going to be a key part of our next conversation, which is there was an ad aired on Sunday for the series by Fox during an NFL game. I don't know anything about NFL, so it was a popular one apparently. Had loads of viewers, some playoff game or something.
I'll just interject there. They have been airing adverts and little features on NFL games or college football games, both of which are extremely popular in the US throughout the last kind of month, 2-3 months, throughout the NFL season, really, since the Fox deal was announced in the first place, which is a lot of eyes being shown or being introduced to IndyCar that, well, the NBC weren't doing this. They weren't utilizing their major events to do this. And IndyCar or Fox are showcasing IndyCar on a weekly basis on some of their biggest sporting programs. So it's a big deal.
Yeah. But so, yeah, this advert, was the first sort of major big promotional push. And it's one of 3 that Fox are doing with a specific driver. So this one was based on Joseph Newgarden. And then you've got Alex Palou coming and Pato O'Ward coming at a later date. It's not focused on the series themselves. It's more focused on the personalities of their drivers to try and build a relationship and an understanding of the drivers rather than the actual series itself. Because there's not actually much IndyCar content in there, to be honest, of actual cars going on track, that sort of thing. So it's about the personality, really. And it's been quite a big ad, and it's sort of the first major one we've had. Features Tom Brady in there as well, which is, huge because everyone in America knows who Tom Brady is. Even though I know who Tom Brady is, I know nothing about American football, so that tells you everything you need to know. Quite a humorous ad. Started off with the old sperm journey and clips of Joseph drinking milk when he was 2 and fighting and being a perfectionist by having a hedge cut out of himself, and his new children's book, which everyone in America loves, apart from Alex Palou, who then cuts to saying, "My kid hated it," obviously referring to the good old rival Joseph Newgarden. As we said, mentioned about having the best jawline in sports until Tom Brady says he's not all that handsome. He's playing ping pong with his eyes closed. Anything else you can remember from that ad which was slightly amusing? That's all from the top of my head.
Yeah, I would say just go and check it out on IndyCar and Fox's channels. They are now across social media, YouTube. So go and give them a follow, because obviously they will be pretty prominent. And I think just kind of latching onto what you said, I mean, we'll start going through now what the drivers had to say specifically about Fox, because that was one of the big talking points of the day. But Alex Palou's comments were kind of the ones that stood out most to me. Obviously, kind of starting with his involvement in that advert, it was brief, but he spoke about, yeah, okay, I've not read Joseph's kids' book, but I've read loads of kids' books, because Alex Palou is obviously a fairly recent new dad. But he shed a bit of light on the commercial, said it was shot in LA in December, and he was just really impressed with it all. He said there was a massive set, which is not something that the drivers have really been used to with commercials that NBC have shot, for instance. NBC, from commercials I've seen, would predominantly use on-track footage, which is great because you want to showcase the on-track product, but a lot of that, and this is something that Palou points out, was tailored very heavily towards the Indy 500, whereas Fox are already showcasing the personalities and not narrowing IndyCar down to just the Indy 500. And that's something I've been really hot on, is they really need to promote the series and the season as a whole and the 17 races as a whole, rather than just the Indy 500, because people already know about the Indy 500. They need to be taught about everything else. And Palou made one very pertinent point, I thought, about, they're showcasing all of these commercials during NFL games or college football games. Conveniently, the IndyCar off season falls the complete time. The IndyCar season, falls completely during the NFL off season, and vice versa. So they're trying to tap into clearly these other sports fans to try and get them to watch IndyCar when maybe their favorite sport is not on. So yeah, I think it's just very impressive. It sounds like they've put an awful lot of effort, an awful lot of resources into filming these adverts. The fact that this is not the only one just with Newgarden, and that Palou was at the center of one, that Pato O'Ward said he's at the center of one that is yet to come out. But yeah, Palou said it's on another level, and to get the champion speaking like that about this sort of stuff is really cool.
Yeah, so we'll go into the more general Fox point, because that's obviously been a big talking point, specifically amongst the senior drivers sort of today. We'll come to touch on both the commercial and the general Fox news as well. So Pato O'Ward was first today. So he stated what Fox IndyCar are doing is freaking phenomenal. He likes the commercial. It was fun. It was edgy. It's flirting with the line where people do get engaged, and it's different. He says he hasn't actually seen his yet, but it's like doing a movie shoot, apparently. So he said he thinks it's going to be a really cool commercial. Carl Kirkwood saw it. He found the Palou part the best, apparently. Said it was a great commercial, and he'd love to see it, which was good. We'll go on to Scott Dixon, who hadn't seen it, so that wasn't particularly helpful. But in regards to a bigger Fox perspective, he obviously says it's big, and he thinks that Fox are going to click, and they're really doing it out the gate, which is good, and wanting to make the series bigger and better, even if that's with NFL or other forms of sports throughout the year, even during the off season. And they've got a lot of things in the works, pretty extensive setup, which is good as well. And he says it's going to be great for the organisation, which is fantastic. And he says it's a good time to switch to Fox with Arlington coming and all these sort of small things coming in. Palou was asked if he's read any children's books lately. He said, yeah, not Joe's this one, but yeah. Which was a funny little reference. Expand on that a little bit more, though. As we said, Palou is one of the two others we are expecting an advert for in the next couple of months. So as you said earlier, shot in December in LA, was very impressed and said it was a very good advert. And it's something they've never really experienced for sort of this level of promotion. As you said, an absolutely massive set, which was pretty cool as well. Says it's fast, it's funny, and he likes that it's showing Joe's instead of the 500. They're sort of appealing to a character side as opposed to just people on a racetrack.
Yeah, and I would just kind of interject there as well to say that there are so many great personalities in IndyCar, and it really encourages me that we are finally seeing the people at the heart being showcased, because, too often, I think when you look at F1's growth, which came in large part in places such as the US through the Drive to Survive series, that was, okay, it's telling the stories of what's happening on track, but it's also enlightening kind of the viewership as to who these people are as well. It's not just a driver in a helmet driving this fighter jet-like machine. It's a person, and I think putting the personalities and the faces to all of the drivers is a massive step in trying to get the growth that IndyCar is targeting. So that is a really big part of it.
So the next line from Pelé, I'm going to read out verbatim just because it's an interesting little segment here. So we don't even need to sell more tickets. We need to make the series big in general. We need to allow people to know what a product is, and they nailed it. I was really impressed during the production, which I didn't go one day there for only 1 second. We will get one for Leave Me, as you said. I can't wait to see what it's like. I hope everybody liked it. For all the comments I saw, everybody was impressed as much as we were. I think this is what the series needed, and it's great to have Fox. So a nice little ending there from Pelé. You said something quite funny about the fan base. You said they'll follow us everywhere. We go to Mars, they will follow us because they love IndyCar. They love the sport so much. We know we have a great product, which was replicated by a few drivers. So it's showing people that doesn't know about racing, doesn't know about IndyCar, doesn't know what IndyCar is, doesn't care about IndyCar. It's about showing them, hey, it's a sport. Some crazy people that go around in the US doing laps and circles, and it's pretty fun. I think the target that they're hitting is amazing, and hopefully we get these new people that are centered on NFL or other sports that are like, oh, during the NFL off-season, I'll watch IndyCar now. Pelé also remarked, which was pretty funny. Big's car cut was said that Pelé was a star. Pelé said, I agree. Actually, Joseph didn't say anything right. It was only me that said something during the commercial, so yes, I agree. Which is pretty amusing. Then we went to Alexander Rossi. He said, I didn't know Joseph was. I just thought it was a Tom Brady commercial. Again, pretty funny. They were having a laugh over this commercial. He said, I thought it was great. He said a commercial with either Joseph, Pato, or Alex is going to change the perception of IndyCar racing. The answer was no, but he says it's a huge step in the right direction that they're looking for, and out of the box thinking, trendy marketing, hitting that news, more younger audience that IndyCar sort of lacks. As he said, he thinks that it's going to bring in the viewership eventually. And they're pushing the series, which is great, bringing the people like Tom Brady, who are Fox employees, and pushing it during the biggest sporting weeks of the year, such as the NFL playoffs, and using other avenues of promotion is what they've wanted and needed as a series. So this is going to take more than a couple of commercials, but it's a step in the right direction and something that is awesome to be a part of. And then says, I don't think any of us could be more excited and thankful for what they've done, and can't wait to see what they do in the future.
So the next couple to speak about it were the AJ Foyt racing pair. David Malukas, he has a unique perspective because one big thing with Malukas is he has a very big kind of social media presence. So he's very in touch of what appeals to Gen Z, of which he is a part. So yeah, I thought what he was speaking about was interesting. That, you know, this is also something that's going to appeal to the next generation as well, and that's what Fox are essentially trying to tap into. And that, you know, something Malukas likes is being able to connect with kind of his generation, a new generation of race fans. He spoke about the fact that he's been told by people that they got into IndyCar because of him. So it's really important because IndyCar's demographic at the moment is predominantly an older viewership, because over time they just haven't done enough to appeal to that younger generation. So I think it's great that what they're doing is feeding a bit more into that. Then on to Ferrucci. I mean, he was another, just to speak about the magnitude of having Tom Brady involved in a commercial. And I think it can't be undersold how important that was, because he is a massive name. He is a really big name, and it's clear, as Ferrucci kind of points out, that they are putting time, they are putting money into this, and this is what IndyCar has needed. And Graham Rahal went on to speak a bit later on about how, you know, it's not a slight against NBC as such, but they did not necessarily put in the work or take advantage of the events or the personnel that they had in order to push IndyCar when they had IndyCar for, you know, a fairly extensive period of time. So hopefully what Fox is doing is appealing to that audience of, yeah, maybe motorsport fans, who Ferrucci says, F1 fans, NASCAR fans, but also at the same time appealing to, yeah, these fans of other sports by just showing that this is this cool, high octane thing with good personalities. Yeah, so they had at the content day, obviously we were doing, so we were attending virtually, so we were not privy to this, but there have been a few images shared here and there. And when Graham Rahal was asked about the set that Fox had brought, he uttered an expletive, which I think said all you needed to know about the effort that they had put in and the content that they were filming. Drivers were coming in. I mean, this was another thing Malukas had said, that, you know, he was running off 5 hours sleep, but the work and the fun stuff that they'd done in terms of filming content with Fox was like a natural version of coffee for him, which again, that's encouraging stuff. But Ray Hall, I mean, he's an eloquent speaker and has so many thoughts on all of these topics. But he kind of just echoed all of the points we've already made, that the booth is really good. I mean, he said one thing about, I think he was asked and shown the scripts to be involved in one of the commercials, and he wasn't sure how good it was going to be, so he turned it down. But then said to the RLL team PR person afterwards, sent her a message saying that was pretty damn good after the commercial came out. And he was another one that said, this is the sort of thing where you build the stars. And again, I mean, Ray Hall was on one of the football shows. I think it was a college football show, as part of this whole promotional push for IndyCar ahead of the season. But he just feels there's really passionate people involved, and he really hasn't seen an effort like this, which is super encouraging. Obviously, it's early days, and we've not seen how it's translated to viewership yet. But all of the drivers have really good things to say about Fox, and they're not going to speak ill of it. But I genuinely believe it when they are speaking in this manner, that a really good thing is happening for IndyCar.
So we started off the day with Pato Award at 8 o'clock US time, 1 o'clock our time. Says he's craving to be getting back. So he's been quite busy off season. Obviously, he's been doing McLaren F1, and he says hasn't had a lot of chance to chill out. So
yeah,
he's got a bit of a chance now, doesn't he?
That really struck me. That he said that he's not had any time off yet because of all of these F1 commitments. He's been around the block, I think, over the off season. So his off season, quote unquote, I mean, he'll be obviously putting in work ahead of the season, but that will come, I think, towards the end of this month. But he's now in a position, and he said he doesn't feel like it, but he's turning 26 this year, and he is the senior driver in a very young Gary McLaren lineup. There's been a lot of change there. Obviously, he was asked about Gavin Ward, team principal, leaving the team. Obviously, there were comments at the time about the fact that I don't know, it felt like almost he'd been scapegoated for the fact that they didn't win the championship last year, which was a really lofty goal in itself, to be quite honest. But I think when he was asked about that, he kind of just deflected a bit. Tony Kanaan's now in charge of, obviously, so he was very, he credited Tony Kanaan's skill set, which obviously involves dealing with drivers with his experience on that side, but also he said the likes of marketing and communications is something that TK is an expert at. But I think O'Wood, he knows the team is not where it needs to be. He knows he's made some mistakes. He knows the team has made some reliability errors, and he just said they need to make the bad days better.
Yeah, so what he said in reflecting on last year, he just said it was inconsistent, which is absolutely correct. That's what stopped him winning a title. He had the most wins of any driver, was just inconsistent. She said, performance-wise, good days were great, bad days were horrible. But there hasn't been one thing that it's like, hey, let's just fix that. And it's not simple because you go to these places and you're so on the edge, because if you're not on the edge, you're like 20th. So he just needs to minimize these sort of joker cars that they have each year and have this consistency. And then when you're sort of asked to develop the inconsistency, again, it's a bit of a McLaren. They don't really know what the issue is. Obviously, development is one. Now they've had a bit more hybrid testing, they understand what that is a little bit more. But he says you sort of just need to be ready for the challenges, and taking a page out of Andrea Stella's book. And when you think about it, it's such a privilege to be in a high pressure situation because you're doing something well. So that's what they want to try and do. They want to sort of thrive in this pressure environment instead of having all these targets to meet and all these massive expectations. Just go out there and race, which he said his job is just to drive the race car. So that's what he's looking to do this year. Was asked about Christian Lundgaard joining the team very briefly on. Says he hasn't really been too attentive because he simply just hasn't been around the team recently. But he was intrigued to see if he'd follow his setup, was something interesting that he noted. Because he says he's been a loner in terms of where he likes his things, and everyone's got their own sort of direction. So that's going to be an interesting point that he raised there.
Yeah, I was going to pick that up. It's an interesting comment, but
he does like it on the edge, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Compared to like a Rossi or Rosenqvist, who are a lot more on the smoother side, he's much more on the edge. And obviously, being Pato, we had a Mexico question towards the end. So he was just asked how huge it would be to have a race in Mexico. He says, people are going to be pumped. I'm going to be pumped. I hope you're all going to be pumped. It's going to be a great event and the best on the calendar outside of the Indy 500. Hope to see it as soon as 2026. He says he's been very involved in it. He just wants to make sure it's a success. And he wants to leave that weekend just saying, wow, we've had an amazing weekend. That's been a great success. Says it's the perfect market for IndyCar to go to because it's such a great community that embraces IndyCar both now and historically, and also Formula One. More talk about Mexico City. Perhaps those comments suggest we're getting even closer to a race in Mexico, potentially as soon as 2026. No surprises there, but was in a pretty happy mood and looks like Mexico is continuing to make good progress. We were next joined by Kyle Kirkwood, obviously racing for Andretti Global. It's his fourth season now for Kirkwood, which is quite surprising. It doesn't feel like it's been around that long, but
yeah. The funny thing is though, he's 26 years old. He's older than Colton Herta, which kind of always creeps up on you, doesn't it? I think he spoke. I mean, he spoke a lot about kind of the consistency that he managed to find last year, and he didn't necessarily match the peaks of the wins that he achieved, the 2 wins he achieved in his first season with Andretti, but. I mean, I think he was only outside the top 10 3 or 4 times tops. So it was a good year. Obviously, ended with a first oval pole at Nashville Super Speedway. He said he sees the advantages to having continuity with their lineup. Only Team Penske and Andretti are keeping the same lineup. And yeah, he just kind of, it was all about keeping the momentum on. He's leaped up again in the standings last year from 11th to 7th. So he's making progress every year. He's now sponsored, at least for St. Pete, by Chili's. So that's a big brand involved. So yeah, I think there's high expectations for Kirkwood. There's high expectations there.
If you're interested, his favorite Chipotle order is the honey Chipotle chicken crispers. Anybody interested? I mean, is there a Chili's in the UK? I'd imagine not. So I've definitely never had it. I've definitely didn't have it when I went to America either. So no idea what it's like. Chili's is nice. Let us know, listeners. But I cannot give a stance on that, unfortunately. But if you agree with Carl Kirkwood's honey Chipotle chicken crispers, that really is a tongue twister, isn't it?
It is.
Honey Chipotle chicken crispers. There we are. That's his favourite thing, apparently. So whether you agree with Carl Kirkwood or not, let us know. As we said, consistency is something he did very well last year, but he sort of thinks the peaks were better than people realised, especially at Nashville and towards the end of the season. He was then asked about Michael Andretti, obviously departing the team in his leadership role, but still states he's still around. It's not like he's vanished. He'll still play a role in the team and he still has that connection. But it seems like a bit more of a partnership between Dan Towers and Michael Andretti than we actually thought.
Yeah, I mean, he said Dan and Michael have a plan. I don't know. It's still quite unclear, really, how involved Michael will be in this kind of advisory role, because it was made to seem like he won't be involved at all, but the drivers are still mentioning his name. And I think it's clear that Dan Towers will be the lead guy. I still partially think that a lot of this Michael stepping back was done in order to get the F1 efforts over the line, even if it will not bear the Andretti name. But Kirkwood, he said he still sees only positives for the team, regardless of this restructure. I mean, going back to a point that you made, he said he felt like he was actually in more winning positions last year, despite not getting the win, than he did in 2023 when he got those couple of wins, when he pretty much just took the 2 chances that he had there. We should probably get onto the F1 side of things.
Well, yeah, so I was about to say, we got to speak to Carl. So there were 2 questions for him. The first was just relating to a change in approach, going from the 2 wins that he had in 23 to a bit more of a consistent approach he had last year. He said he knew consistency was going to be key, but he thought it was going to be a little more important than it actually turned out to be, which was interesting. Which I guess, people like Palou and Power and the teammate Colton Herta had quite a few off days. So it wasn't as important as he thought. But as he said, if you don't look at the results, he thinks they're in contention more. He noted Long Beach and Nashville won in 2023, obviously. But last year, he thought Road America, Laguna Seca, Detroit, and Nashville, he all had an opportunity at last year. But they obviously just didn't pan out. So, but was happy about the consistency and wants to continue that. Probably the biggest thing, which shameless plug, is like what we asked Carl Kirkwood was, in relation to F1, because Colton Herta's name has been quite closely circled next to the Cadillac Formula One entry impending for 2026. So we sort of asked Carl, if the same thing happened to you, would you be interested? And do you feel you deserve an opportunity? And he said, time will tell, but it will be of interest. Says he still loves IndyCar. He aspired to be an IndyCar driver, keeps in the US, lives in his hometown where he was born and raised. And he loves the fact that he could stay at home. But he says it's give and take in either direction, and he'd be interested, but he wouldn't be upset if he weren't given the opportunity, which was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they're always going to be interested at the end of the day if you get the chance to move to F1, regardless of how well we view IndyCar. F1 is still where it's still the most lucrative. If you want to make a career, I mean, just think of the living you will make from being in Formula One. It is regarded as the pinnacle, and I mean, Kirkwood is certainly an outsider, I would say. I think a lot of the chat, obviously, Mario Andretti has been one that has already touted Colton Herta as essentially being a favourite for one of the seats and to fit the bill of wanting an American driver. And we also spoke to Herta, who you could tell, I mean, he was asked one previous question about it before we spoke to him, and I think he was just asked about the super license, and I think he was told and he wasn't aware of this, which I don't know, maybe shows where his headspace is, that he isn't trying to focus too much on it. But he said that, he kind of brushed off that question, to be honest, about whether it adds pressure. He didn't know the maths of it, and he pretty much said if it happens, great. If not, he's stuck in IndyCar. Obviously, kind of saying that sarcastically, and he's absolutely fine with that. But I kind of felt like I should push him and follow up a bit later on, because last year Herta had said that essentially he felt that, I think he's 25 now, turns 26 in March, but as a 24 going on 25 last year on Content Day, he said that essentially he felt like he was at the top of the highest range of age that you can enter F1 in, because as a rookie they tend to be early 20s, and he's now getting into his mid 20s. But he did preface that with last year with saying, with a non-Andretti team and with Dan Tauris, who has obviously taken control of the Andretti Global IndyCar team, being kind of the figurehead behind this Cadillac General Motors F1 effort, Herta still, regardless of age, I think he said that he doesn't really actually care that much about the age factor anymore, and that, I mean, he's tired of the talk. He's tired of the talk, basically. But he did acknowledge that there is a big decision for him to make, and it's clearly on his mind a bit, because it couldn't not be. This is a massive decision that he's going to have to make at some point this year pertaining to 2026.
I think Kirk was interesting, because he was a lot more open about it than I thought he would be, in the sense that he would absolutely take an opportunity, and that he didn't shut it down, which I thought was quite interesting, because I thought it could be something he could shut down quite quickly. Herta is obviously fully aware of it, and it was interesting that he didn't know the permutations, because I feel like if he really did want it, you'd know the permutations. But look, there could be a scenario where Kirkwood gets the super license points that he needs and Herta doesn't. Well, that makes things a different story, and does that now put in Kirkwood in prime position to get that seat? That's it's unlikely. I think Kirkwood would have to win a championship, in fairness, but it's still something that is worth bearing in mind, because it could be that it could still be of interest for Kirkwood if Herta can't get the super license points, which is a whole different saga where F1 grossly underrates IndyCar. Her Colton Herta more than good enough for F1. At least compared to some of the standards there now. So it's a shame that that's the case where he needs to get this. But he said he's been dragged around the talk for about half a decade now, and he's sort of tired of it, and he just wants to focus on IndyCar. So quickly shut down F1, but he's obviously more than aware of it.
Yeah. I mean, I did feel bad for asking the question. I think you kind of have to ask it because it is such a big story. But he gave kind of more of an answer than I expected when he kind of started it off, and he was saying he was tired. I think if you want to read kind of the full story here, it is up on the DIVEBOMB site. I think just the final note on the F1 stuff is Marcus Ericsson was also asked about, well, he's basically asked for clarification on some reports that had suggested he was involved in simulator work with Cadillac. It turns out that was essentially a misunderstood report that had come from Sweden, that had kind of been taken out of context by people, and that he had actually just been testing simulators for Andretti Global. He was a little bit vague in talking about this, but he did shut down the fact that he had been doing simulator work, or was going to be doing simulator work for Cadillac. So that's just worth a mention. But yeah, just kind of finishing off on the Herta note, he's got to finish top 4 in the championship. He's done so twice, obviously making that leap from finishing 10th 2 years on the trot to finish second last year in 2020, which was his first year with Andretti. His sophomore year in IndyCar, he finished 3rd. So he feels like he can win the championship this year. He feels in the position to do that. He knows, he's acutely aware of essentially 4 places that lost him at least the chance to fight to the death with Palou last year, which were his own crashes in Indianapolis and Detroit. So in the 500, threw it away when he possibly had the fastest car. Detroit made an audacious move. Then also got caught out by a caution and a tire issue, his tire falling off in Milwaukee, which were out of his control. But I think he just wants to control the controllables and see what happens there. But yeah, I think the only issue where I think he's still talking about the fact that the ovals haven't necessarily been his best, and he still should improve on short ovals. But he got 2 podiums late in the season last year, so that was a necessary step for him to make too.
Oh, if you want to hear Colton Herta's Chili's order, it's triple dipper, comma baby is what he said. So
I hope that makes sense to some people, because it doesn't make sense to me.
Doesn't make sense to us. Before Colton Herta, we actually had Felix Rosenqvist, because Kirkwood and Herta had a similar topic before. We'll just combine them together. But we have Felix Rosenqvist got married in the off-season. Juan Pablo Montoya says it costs 2/10 when you get married, but Rosenqvist says it gains you a little more experience. So we'll see how that one pans out. What was interesting is now he's the veteran driver of Meyer Shank alongside Marcus Armstrong. He says it's a really exciting time for the team. Obviously, the IMSA stuff is coming back with 2 cars after taking a year out last year of the series. So he says that's exciting. He says he's there for the Christmas party, and there's a lot of faces he didn't see before, which is quite interesting. Says Mike and Jim are hungry. Obviously, Mike Shank and Jim Meyer are hungry, and they're looking how they can grow, become better, become faster. But his core group is still mostly there. Says the Ganassi partnership is exciting, and obviously he used to be there 6 years ago, so he says there's a lot of familiar faces there. Pitstown's pretty much unchanged, and basically the team were in a really good position, which was quite interesting. He sort of expand on that a little bit more when they go on to the technical relationship with Chip Ganassi. He says obviously that's really positive as well. Sort of having that link as well between a lot of people he knew, which is great. And Ganassi had been the best team for ages, so it's a long-term thing, which is creating even more ambition, which I think was interesting for Felix.
Yeah, obviously with the alliance moving from Andretti to Chip Ganassi Racing, that's one powerhouse to another, one powerhouse to a slightly more powerful house in recent years, you could say. So yeah, it was a matter, isn't it, really, of were you going to stick with the continuity of Andretti or seize this opportunity with Ganassi? And I think you were always going to seize the opportunity with Ganassi. The Marcus Armstrong entry at Meyer Shank, he's obviously coming on board. He will come into press tomorrow. That is essentially a Ganassi run car with Ganassi engineers, which was part of the reason why Meyer Shank has now suddenly got so many new faces, obviously combined with the IMSA program coming back, the GTP program, the 2 cars there. Yeah, there wasn't huge amounts of notes from Rosenqvist. I thought it was interesting. He said that he actually coached Marcus Armstrong in Italian F4 back in the day, which is quite something. But
Marcus was 14 apparently.
Wow. But yeah, they obviously started last year off really strongly on the Rosenqvist side and just fell off. But he attributes most of that actually to technical issues, and he's right. They had so many problems that were just completely out of his control that sent what was a really impressive start to the season just spiraling quite a lot. And he described the mid-season as lukewarm, but I don't really think Rosenqvist himself did much wrong last year.
What's rather interesting is he expands on the Ganassi thing a little bit more, but he says he's spending time in the Ganassi shop, and they're obviously sharing all the dampers and engineering and stuff. So it seems like this relationship is very, very close. It's
Yeah.
pretty much one Ganassi team, it's seeming, which is
He
rather interesting.
described them as one unit, which kind of feels similar to what was described with the Andretti relationship as well. But yeah, it's certainly big that for Rosenqvist, because Ganassi did not want to let him go when he left, so they are kind of reunited in one way or another.
We'll then go on to the final Andretti driver we haven't covered, which is Marcus Ericsson. Obviously, he had a little bit of a difficult year last season, only the one podium and not really the results we expected. So he says the off-season is an opportunity to get better. So he's looking at ways of improving himself. We'll go on to the mental side of it a bit more in a minute. But he says it's given him motivation to work harder. He says he doesn't believe in own luck. He believes you make your own luck. He says he didn't do a good enough job, which was interesting. So he's put a lot of work, both with his mental training, which we'll get onto in a second, and a lot more on his physical status as well. He says he's stronger than he's ever been before, and he started doing simulator work on his own, trying to just finesse his craft, basically. So he's saying he's taking the opportunity to try and be better, try and work harder and prepare better. And he says he's a big believer in preparation being key and you making your own luck. He wants to give himself the best chance to succeed, which is really interesting. We'll get onto the mental bit of it in a second, as I said. But Ericsson's obviously put a lot of work in this off-season because he was not happy at his own performances last year.
Yeah, I mean, he's acutely aware that finishing 15th in the standings, while obviously teammate Herta was second and Kirkwood in his second year with the team was seventh, that he's aware that that's not good enough. And he had a disastrous month of May, obviously crashing in practice in the Indy 500, having to go to the backup car, which was slow and almost missing the race. So I think he said that took quite a lot out of him. And that was obviously a big part and a big dent on that first season. He only got the one podium, obviously, in Detroit. So he's aware that it's not good enough. I think he also said that when he joined Ganassi, his first year wasn't quite what he wanted it to be. And sometimes it takes that first year just to gel, and that's understandable, but you've obviously got to see the results on track this year. But I think it really fascinated me that even now, being a guy in his mid-30s with almost 100 F1 races under his belt across that 5-year span up until 2018, he's vastly experienced, but he's continuing to want to learn and strive to get better. And I think that really speaks to his mindset as well. He was one of the drivers who impressed me most, I think, today, Ericsson. He really feels the team has sky-high potential. They have the tools to win the championship. They've just got to execute, which has always been a problem in recent years in Andretti, and they definitely improved last year, certainly on the 26 and 27 cars, at executing with the pace that they have. And Ericsson was a master of consistency while he was at Ganassi. I think it was 3 successive years he was sixth in the standings. So he's just got to refine that, and it's not just going to have disappeared. So I think he's been obviously looking at tape and just looking back at what went wrong. And he's going to be super prepared going into this season.
One thing which is quite interesting, he spoke quite a lot about having a mental trainer. So he says the mental trainer does quite a lot of different things, but it sort of gives him a new perspective. And he thinks the mental aspect is almost more important than the physical aspect, the higher you get up into the sport. And he believes that he'll find an edge on the mental side of things. He's got a new mental trainer, which is rather interesting.
Yeah, I just find it fascinating that, he was talking about also putting a lot of muscle on, which Nolan Siegel later on actually spoke about that. He's put 15 pounds on. I think Ericsson said maybe he'd gained 10 pounds of muscle over the off season, but he's been working on his sim almost daily as well. But yeah, he said that it's as important, if not more, than going to the gym, for instance, working with this mental coach, which is not something that all drivers do, or at least all drivers are open about doing. But he was extremely candid about kind of the benefits of that. And yeah, he said there's a wide range of benefits, and they discuss a range of things from how his week's going to what's happening on track. But it's not solely stuff on track. It just allows him to get in the right headspace to then perform on track. And he just says, yeah, it gives him perspective, it gives him guidance, and it's something that's kind of really underappreciated.
Should have gone to his former teammate in Scott Dixon. I think the biggest sort of story for Dixon was the downsizing of Ganassi. It was probably what I found most interesting. Obviously, limited by the charters, the team have gone from 5 entries to 3 entries. He says he thinks they help a lot in attention to detail and getting back to the basics. I thinks they were a little stressed on people for the size of the team, and that's only going to be helped by the partnership with Maya Shank Racing. So obviously, there's going to be a fair few personnel changes, but with the Indy Lights team and the IMS and stuff going on as well, there's a nice time to be part of Chip Ganassi Racing. It says with the Shank Alliance, they've done a good job bringing some structure to it. It was well managed, especially the meetings. So with 5 cars, the team did do a good job, but you don't quite get the same amount of cohesion maybe you do from a smaller unit. So it is looking forward to going back down to 3, which was probably the biggest thing I took away from Dixon.
Yeah, and I think it is very pertinent as well, saying that the Maya Shank Alliance is going to be something quite seamless, because essentially Marcus Armstrong is staying with the same group, just switching team technically, and the fact that obviously Rosenqvist knows the team as well. So yeah, that was probably the main thing. I mean, it was pointed out to Dixon that this is, I mean, it's 25 years since he won the Indy Lights Championship. So 25 years in IndyCar, which is quite impressive. He just reflected a little bit on 24 as well, where he was leading the championship after picking up his second win in the first 6 races in Detroit, and from there he just said it went to bleep. Insert the word there that you may wish. We described it as a bit of a trying year, and a lot happened that was out of his control. Some stuff he would change. He had the hybrid fail ahead of the Mid-Ohio race, the hybrid debut, obviously. He had a dodgy tyre at Road America that completely screwed his race. He was crashed out in Portland. And just little mistakes here and there that he said he would cut out. But he feels maybe Ganassi as a team did not excel in certain areas. He said they were okay on road courses. He said their street course race pace was okay, but the qualifying was not great. They could improve on short ovals as well. So yeah, I think it wasn't a bulletproof year for Ganassi last year, which is kind of makes it all the more impressive that Palou yet again won the championship as he did. But no, I mean, the one other note actually with the Maya Shank Alliance, he was talking about the fact he's going to be working with Helio Castro Neves, 4-time Indy 500 winner, for the very first time in his career. 2 of the legends of the series that are going to be uniting for the first time in Indy, and well, throughout the season. Obviously, Castro Neves not driving, but on board in a fairly prominent board role at Maya Shank as well. So he's often front and center. So Dixon and Castro Neves, that's some veteran power.
Yeah, some other sort of interesting stuff about the championship perspective said last year they prepared well, but execution was maybe not so great on many levels. Obviously, that is now a serious thing. I think he said back in the day you could win championships despite retiring from 6 races, and it was like,
yeah, a 16 race championship
nowadays.
Yeah, a 16 race championship, retiring 6 times, you could still win the championship. One thing I did think was interesting, actually, he said that he quite likes just being under the radar. You've got talk of Joseph Newgarden winning 3 successive Indy 500s, teammate Palou doing the 3-peat in terms of the championship. He just wants to fly under the radar. He doesn't mind that.
Yeah, pretty interesting from Scott Dixon. He had a lot to speak about, so we could be here for rather wise. But those are the main things I got from Dixie. Alex Palou, his teammate, obviously going for a 3rd championship in a row. It's going to be a challenge for Palou, as always. It's the classic. Oh, it's very competitive. It's never easy to win in this series, which is obviously true. But he's always a bit reserved. Palou never gives too much away. But yes, obviously competitive, and it's going to be tough to win 3 in a row, as they say every year, and then he'll win it again, and we'll be back here in a year's time saying the same thing.
This is the things with the guys at the top who are succeeding. Obviously, Palou coming off the back of 2 successive championships. You're not going to get anything bold from them, because saying, yeah, we're in the championship picture, our goal is to win the championship, that's not particularly bold. We'll get onto the fact that Santino Ferrucci said AJ Foyt Racing could be in the championship picture. That's the sort of thing that's a talking point. But yeah, for Palou, I mean, he was just reflecting on the fact that compared to 2023, which was record breaking in so many ways, obviously sealing the championship well before the final race, 2024 was more full of up and downs. It was not quite as consistent. He said his favorite phrase again, that he needs to cut out sometimes finishing P bananas. such as when he made that uncharacteristic error and crashed out at Iowa. He said that even finishing P17 is better than what happened at Iowa. But I think the most interesting thing that came from him, actually, other than the stuff we've spoken about with Fox, was he said that if it was his choice, he would prioritize next season doing the three-peat, winning 3 successive championships, joining the 4-time champion club over winning a first Indy 500. However, if he was forced to retire at the end of 2025 and he could only accept one, he would then take the Indy 500. So I thought that was an interesting kind of insight too.
Alexander Rossi making a switch to Ed Carpenter Racing for 2025. Has been announced there for a while, actually, has Rossi. So broke the ice at Test in Indianapolis at the end of last year. He's just looking at ECR going through a big change quite clearly. New investment. They've got a new logo, which we both find absolutely hideous.
It's quite basic.
It's almost like gone too simple, and it looks. Yeah, I'm not a fan.
I don't like the lowercase ECR. I think it's. I would rather it be capitalized. The whole thing.
I'm not a fan. Some people might like it. For me, I'm not really a fan.
Nice race suits though. Decent.
Nice race suits.
Race suits.
Yeah, a bit of a grey and a black. Although the VK green last year I thought was quite cool. But anyway, we're getting really off topic here. I mean, no wildly different. There's no like Aaron McLaren last year where the race suits were blinding you as they came into the room. Simpson had one, but we'll get into that in a minute. And Malukas actually. But otherwise, nothing.
Felix Rosenqvist turned up in kind of a darkish navy black with a bit of purple pink on it, but apparently that's only a temporary thing. That's not a race suit he's actually going to use. I must also say with Felix Rosenqvist, something we didn't say, he was the latest driver of the day. He turned up 11 minutes late to his...
Well, no. It was...
David Malukas was close, but he was 9 minutes late. We were counting. I was making a record. This
will continue into tomorrow, by the way. So what did you take away from Rossi? I'm starting all of these. What did you get from Rossi?
I think the fact that he'd said even since he kind of came on board with the team in October, things have just been constantly evolving. He didn't necessarily detail stuff exactly, but obviously they have a new business partner, Ted Gelov, coming on board with his brands. And essentially that's meant that ECR, rather than being in a position where they need 2 drivers to be paying for the seats and bringing them the money, they were able to hire Rossi and hire or maintain Christian Rasmussen as part of their lineup as a hired driver. So it's a big deal that I think this is a real long-term thing. We've got Ed Carpenter coming in to press tomorrow. So that's going to be interesting to kind of hear from him about maybe just more about this project and where they are aiming to be within the next 5 years, because Rossi clearly sees this as a big play for the future. It's a slightly different thing to what Rossi's been used to. He obviously came in. I mean, this is his 10th season in IndyCar, his first season, obviously, and for a long while was with an Andretti team that were front running, and then an Aaron McLaren team that similarly had those ambitions. But with Ed Carpenter Racing, really in recent years, it's been Rinus VK leading the charge, and he's been stuck finishing between 12th and 14th in the standings. So that's kind of why Rossi doesn't necessarily have a clear idea of what success is. He said he was quite vague. He just said that success for the year is being in the conversation. But he feels with so many kind of things changing at the team and things being in IndyCar, just such small margins anyway, that there could be big gains made by the team. He said that moving from a Chevrolet team to a Chevrolet team is helpful, unlike when he went from Andretti to Aaron McLaren when it was Honda to Chevrolet. But no, it's just he's got a good relationship with the new partners. He's had a long-standing relationship with Ed Carpenter. The team owner obviously owns a plane with him. He said that the funding is not always the solution to the problems, and that actually fundamentally it's about the people, and he believes there are good people there at Ed Carpenter Racing. Some that he has existing relationships, others not. But yeah, the team is in a really, really good way, it seems. Or there's at least a lot of promise. They've now got to deliver on that.
Car talk.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of chat throughout the day about, I mean, we've discussed it a few weeks ago about the reports that drivers or certain drivers, as it seems, as some did apparently not see it, were basically shown a render.
Notably, O'Ward, by the way, had not seen this.
Notably, O'Ward had not seen it. Scott Dixon seemed pretty unaware as well. But they were shown a render, a picture of a quick picture. It was only, I think, in passing in a driver meeting at the back end of last year, back end of 2024. that is essentially the initial plan for what IndyCar wants to do in 2027 as they finally draw to a close after, seemingly want to draw to a close after what would be about 15 years of the current DW12 formula, to introduce a new chassis. And a lot of drivers were asked about this. Credit to David Land, who seemed to be the chief asker of that question. But I took it upon myself when David seemingly was not present to ask Alexander Rossi, and he gave a really good answer. And the start of his answer was particularly interesting because I had, I'll just find how I worded my question. I said, I said that I'd like to get Rossi's take on discussion of maybe there being a new car in 2027. He interjected to say it's not a maybe, it's happening. So there's clear confidence that this is something that's going to happen. Rossi then kind of just weighed into, like many drivers, what he believes is the way that IndyCar should be going. He said that some people that have the belief that it needs to be really futuristic and crazy and look ultra modern, and yeah, okay, maybe that will appeal to some audiences, but there are also certain fundamentals that, there are in the current car that mean that this is brilliant racing, that with this formula that's been around for the best part of a decade and a half. But yeah, Rossi says that, there's one side of the coin, which is this super futuristic, modernized car. And then the other side of the coin is essentially a super light, kind of high horsepower, powerful car that can maybe break track records. He believes that we do in IndyCar have the best product globally on track. So to completely reinvent the wheel and go with something new, and that could be something that maybe compromises safety or the structural integrity of the current car, which allows such aggressive racing. He feels that they don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. He would rather see an evolution. Obviously, technology, he says, has developed and materials have developed, and the DW12 is by no means where it was when it started, but it is fundamentally the same car. So yeah, he feels at the moment, just from a cost standpoint, they have to consider that. They have to consider the safety standpoint, a workability standpoint for mechanics, for instance. Just everything has to kind of fit and flow and work together a bit better, is what he said. But he doesn't want to do anything drastic. I did then ask him, or press him a little bit on the renders that had been shown, whether he could kind of share anything on that. And he was reserved. He kind of jokingly said, yeah, probably not, might get in trouble. But I thought that was really interesting, and he was not the only one to speak about it either.
Should we go on to the rest of them?
Yeah, let's go on to the rest of them. So yeah, Graham Rahal, he speaks in a lot of depth, often on all sorts of topics. People may remember back in the summer when the charter agreement was just before it was finalised, he gave us a really good answer on that. But he actually on this occasion gave, by no means a short answer, but quite a succinct answer that I thought was really, really good. And the bit that really stood out to me was he said it needs to be something fast, authentic, and loud, and that those should kind of be the fundamentals of what IndyCar is gunning for with this new car. He wants it to kind of relate to the things that make people love racing in the first place, the sights, the sounds, the smells of it. And for one, he said that electrification is something that has been mentioned, or that people have suggested maybe that he doesn't agree with. Rahal himself is an owner of car dealerships, and he believes that hybridization is definitely the way for the future. But he wants something with, through hybrid power, to have a lot of horsepower and be efficient. And that's kind of just generally, I think, what I've canvassed from drivers throughout the day is they want something that, okay, it could look funky, but that's not necessarily the main thing. It has to have that structural integrity, but also be something that's unique, something that's lighter, and something that's more powerful, because the current car is too heavy and the hybrid power is not really that much at the moment. So they're kind of the keys that I picked up throughout the day. Yeah, I agree. I think just it's worth mentioning what Dixon had said as well, being kind of one of the more senior drivers. He hasn't seen it. I mean, it was thrown to him. Does it have 2 wheels, 3 wheels, 6 wheels? But no, he hasn't really actually heard much about it. But one thing he touted that was different, as well as kind of the more power, the lessening of the weight, is possibly power steering, because it's something that could help with safety. It's something that other championships have that IndyCar does not have currently, which is the reason why, as we speak about, drivers are saying they're having to put more muscle on over the off season. Yeah, he's another to suggest that the fundamentals kind of work well. But at the moment, the car is only a few seconds quicker per lap than an Indy Next car, which is not how it should be. And they need to do something that radically solves that, really.
Should we get on to David Malukas, who has now switched to the number 4 AJ Foyt Racing Chevrolet, which makes a return to the team after about 3 or 4 years of not being used, which is interesting. He suddenly announced that on Twitter yesterday. Obviously, he's now with Santino Ferrucci at AJ Foyt Racing, which is going to be an interesting lineup. What I did like him saying is he was asked how careful he's going to be in the next couple of weeks, obviously referring to his accident last year on the mountain bike at Aaron McLaren. He says the craziest thing he's done is go ziplining with his nephews, and the drop was only like 2 feet. He had to lift his knees up to do the ziplining. It's the most chaotic thing he's done. But he says he's matured a lot, so that's going to help things as well. Interesting, I know we briefly touched on this about Fox and Gen Z, but he says the next generation is starting to come in. Those fans are starting to come, and people were going up to him saying they're watching IndyCar because of him, and he is Gen Z, so he understands how this works, which was rather interesting. He was also asked about dealing with one of the oldest people in racing, AJ Foyt. Said he met him a few months back, and it's a perfect setup going to the season, and a lot of ideas that are going to mix. Quite funny on later, he was speaking to Foyt, and he said it's a little hard because I'm going into it as it's AJ and you're trying to have a normal conversation, but the entire time it's like I'm talking of AJ, so I'm trying to act normal, you're not acting normal. And I think he could sense like what is wrong with this kid and what is he doing. I think he could sense it a little bit. Then described him as chill, and it almost felt like we were good friends. He started talking about the stories of the past and the history. To say that he's happy to be on the team, that means a lot too, which was pretty funny. Has said he cannot reveal AJ Foyt's birthday present yet. So sorry for those listeners looking to find out AJ Foyt's birthday present.
Yeah, I just thought another keynote that bears a mention is Malukas actually said he had another kind of corrective surgery on his wrist that he injured ahead of the season last year, which ultimately led to him losing the Aaron McLaren drive, ending up at Meyershank Racing, replacing Tom Blomqvist. So there was still a few issues there. It wasn't, I don't think, anything major. Obviously, he drove through it and drove very well enough to kind of have convinced AJ Foyt Racing to take him on board with that link to Team Penske. But he did have another surgery post-season just to fix some of the kind of limited movement. He said it's not perfectly back, but a lot better.
And in regards to the Ferrucci relationship, which I think is going to be something that interests a lot of you, says he's interested to see the setups are going to be. They did some simulator work together, but the driving doesn't seem too far off. He says they don't know driving styles until obviously the Sebring test, but they expect them to be fairly similar, especially on ovals in driving style, which is rather interesting. So that's going to benefit them, so they can use pretty similar setups, which suit both driver preferences, which I thought was rather interesting. So that's going to be another potential factor to the Foyt strength going into 2025, which we'll get onto particularly with Ferrucci. There was one more figure I wanted to bring up with David Malukas, which was being in the car number 4. So the reason why he wants it, he says he's got a good ring and I'm excited from constant side of things because I can replace the A in Dave and just no 4. I think it'll be really cool. It's good merch. And then it says, I'm really excited because then I can wear it. Imagine little Dave, but then the A is a 4. It's pretty cool. I'm not going to lie. DM4 merch coming your way. And I'm sure at some point in next year, you'll be able to find it on the Formula Model Shop website amongst of all the other IndyCar merchandise, because it is the best place to get your IndyCar merchandise in the UK and across the rest of the continent.
You can use the discount code 5BOMB, or one word, FIVEBOMB, to gain 5% off products on the FMS site. Visit the highlights on the DIVEBOMB Motorsport Instagram account for a link to an exclusive VIP section on the FMS store, courtesy of DIVEBOMB.
As we said last week, the website is spruced up a little bit on the DIVEBOMB website, dive-bomb.com, if you haven't checked it out. So have a look at that. But the Formula Model Shop banner is still on our homepage, don't worry, so you can go directly to the Formula Model Shop website, or you could go to www.formulamodelshop.co.uk.
Stay tuned for exclusive giveaways, events, and other content.
Next event of the day was Devlin DiFrancesco, who's returned to IndyCar after a year out in the number 30 car for Rahal Lanigan Racing. Didn't get too much from Devlin DiFrancesco. I'm not really surprised because we haven't seen him for a year, so therefore not too much to talk about to him. So it was obviously tough to watch in the sidelines, but it was good for him to be able to reflect and analyse on what he needed to work on, which is quite interesting. Says it's good to have the stability of a multi-year contract as well. So I think they said it was a 3-year contract, so that's going to be good for him. Says the team's up and coming, they have a lot of resources and been working hard.
Together, he feels that himself and the team have a big point to prove. He described to you the deal kind of going over the line as a big relief, as very relieving, I think. He actually said that he had the flu when he found out. He was laying on his couch when he got the call. But I think the most interesting nugget to come from Devlin was actually came from Graham Rahal, who was just, I mean, we may as well get on to Rahal just while we're talking about his teammate, but he was kind of just speaking about some of the challenges the team may face this year, and that, you know, they've obviously got Louis Foster, who is extremely quick, and he won't have an issue pace-wise, but obviously as a rookie, he's going to have to get used to all of the nuances of IndyCar. But Rahal, you know, he's acutely aware of the perception of Devlin DiFrancesco as a pay driver, and, you know, he was keen to kind of quash the fact that, you know, I mean, he said that the 30 car that DiFrancesco is driving is secure for many years, which again shows that, you know, the primary reason DiFrancesco is because of the funding. But Rahal also said that he's ultra impressed with how DiFrancesco has conducted himself since he joined. He has always been kind of present at the shop, but he actually was the first teammate that Graham's ever had that has immediately sent him a text message with a list of stuff that he wants to learn from Rahal, being a veteran driver, and improve on, which is really impressive. That is really impressive. That impressed me a lot. And I think Rahal kind of speaking about this as well, knowing the perception of his teammate, speaks to his leadership and his character as well.
Yeah, which was rather interesting, as Archie alluded to. Spoke to DiFrancesco about sort of the feeling of missing out for a seat, and if he thought he'd ever get the opportunity again. He said had the flu laying down when he got a call from Bobby. He said it's one of the best days he's had in a very, very long time, which was quite nice. So we'll stay in the RLL circle just to finish off on Graham Rahal, who was actually the last driver of the day, but we'll skip to him now. Went on for football per ages. I think Rossi supports the team that Rahal's team is playing college football or something, and doesn't think Rahal's team is very good. Don't really understand it, but there we are. That's something.
Good job we're an IndyCar podcast.
Yeah, not a college football podcast. Otherwise, I don't think we'd be very good at our job. Obviously, it's been quite a tough few years for Graham. The results haven't really been there, but there was one thing he said, which he was reflecting 2024, and I actually found this really interesting. He said, if there was one thing that needs to change, and he basically said less failures, which he said was an obvious statement, but he says when you look at the finishing position, obviously it isn't good, but when you watch back the first half of the season, you'd see his name in the top 10 pretty much every race until something went wrong. So that would spiral to grid penalties, which obviously then spirals to qualifying further down, leads to poor results longer term. And actually, if they can just put that out of the way, they won't be starting on the back foot every other race by having a grid penalty, which I thought was actually a very interesting point, where on paper it was an awful year, but actually if you condense it to the bare bones, it actually isn't as bad as people make it out to be.
He was so unlucky last year, Graham Rahal. In May alone, he seemed to have 2 or 3 engines expire, which is just, it's horrible look. And he had so many failures. I mean, it was failures even like a wheel basically breaking and not delaminating. There was I think it was one of the spokes broke, which is, I mean, that shouldn't detract from the fact the team still struggled performance-wise. I think Rahal, I mean, it's been kind of regarded as one of his worst seasons of his career, and I think that is unfair if you look at, like he said, where he had been running and all of the misfortune and just the snowball effect of all of those grid penalties. But at the same time, for probably the second or third really season in a row now, they are enacting big personnel changes internally heading into the season. And I just worry a little bit that team has not had much stability from the personnel side, which cannot be
it's got to be a bit counterproductive for them, really. Rahul's positive. He said that, there's people with character in that team. They've got a lot of young personnel they're bringing to the forefront. Does young mean inexperience? Is that a bit of a worry? I guess that remains to be seen. But he said that it kind of has to be seen as a reset, which again, there's been a lot of resets for this team. They lost a big sponsor, obviously, in Hy-Vee this off season, which is a big deal. And obviously that's one of the reasons why they had to bring Di Francesco and the backing that he said on board. They've lost Christian Lundgaard too, despite Rahal saying he was given a great opportunity to remain with the team. So yeah, it is a reset. They've just got to get out of this kind of having a reset every year phase, though, as a team. The only other interesting note from Rahal, which again kind of links back to the Fox stuff and the growth of the series, that he said that the Arlington race, the part of the race that's partnered with the Dallas Cowboys and the Texas Rangers, which was announced again back end of last year for 2026, he said that actually this was something that was discussed before Penske even took over the IndyCar series, which I thought was an interesting nugget. He said he thought it was a pipe dream, but nope, that is something that's now become a reality. So that's interesting that these things that are kind of perceived as being far-fetched are happening. He expects another big event or more to come in the next 12 months. Obviously, I would assume alluding there to Mexico. So yeah, it's exciting times. We got similar promises last year, but I think it feels a step forward again this season.
We'll go to Santino Ferrucci. We'll say Ferrucci's outrageous comments towards the end of this conversation. We'll start off with his bond of teammate David Malukas. Obviously touched that a minute ago. Says he hasn't spent time with him outside of work, but he says he'll fix that. So we'll see how Malukas thinks of that. But they want to spend time together, apparently. So we'll call on some Ferrucci's side. Says the way they were going into last year, really strong on ovals, picked up the pole, had a really good sort of momentum towards the end of last season. Was asked about Michael Cannon, who's obviously leaving the team to go to Prema. Says it's a bummer. The stars don't align. Says he doesn't want to go against Prema at Indy because they're likely very fast with Michael Cannon leading the operation there.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to interject there as well. Say, I don't think we've discussed the fact that Michael Cannon, I mean, we'll get more into Prema tomorrow because they had their launch event hosted by Will Buxton this week. But Michael Cannon was there in the photos. That was kind of the first confirmation that he was going to be a part of that team. Roman Grosjean's there as a reserve driver. I think Ryan Briscoe's there as a sporting director or a similar role. But the fact that Cannon's there is big because Indy and ovals is a thing that Prema are not used to. So him being on board, this genius at Indy, really the reason why Foyt had such a turnaround in the last couple of years. Ferrucci finishing third at Indy in 23, down to Michael Cannon. So for Prema, that's a massive coup as a new team.
For those interested, Santino Ferrucci sort of shut down any chance of him doing a double because there isn't really any good NASCAR cars that he could jump into, so that's not going to happen. Says he's never looked at Daytona either. One thing I asked him is, Foyt are moving all their operations over to Indianapolis. They used to split one car between Indianapolis and Texas. So just seeing if Santino thought this was a benefit. And he gave really good answers, actually. Says that was the next step, and that will really help us in minimizing mistakes. Now that you've got engineers looking over the car in Indy, making sure that the mechanic's doing everything correct and as guided. The meetings are in-house. No one's playing telephone lag. If there's a quick question, you don't have to try and get a hold of somebody. You just walk and switch rooms. Having that's going to be huge. He did like a Texas shop just because it was 3 hours from his house. We found this really interesting because here 3 hours is like halfway across the country. But for Santino Ferrucci, it's a local drive to work, seemingly, which was rather amusing. Says he loved the shop and he got to spend a lot of time with AJ Foyt down there. But he'll miss that side of things. But from a performance standpoint, that was needed. Tried to probe him for the car a little bit. Says he saw one of the renders. Didn't have really much thought for it, but he trusts Penske and what they're doing and the product they're trying to create, which was rather interesting.
I think the only other thing that was particularly interesting, apart from the really interesting thing that Ferrucci said, is that he's actually in the midst of competing in the Chili Bowl, which is a kind of midget dirt racing, a massive midget dirt racing event. And it's just interesting hearing kind of the differences that he likened the feeling a bit to the Indy 500 and doing qualifying runs at Indy, in the fact that when he gets out of the car, you're kind of just shaking because it's such an unnatural kind of phenomenon that your nerves and everything are dialed up to 10, he said. But yeah, it's just interesting that he's kind of in the midst of that. He's keeping active during the off season with something that is about as adrenaline filled as you can get, bar maybe qualifying at Indy.
So this is something I was going to ask him, but someone took my question, and I'm glad they did because he gave a fantastic answer. So there was a quote going around the end of last year that Ferrucci said they had a legitimate shot at the championship at Foyt. Does it still feel like a championship potential season now that we're in 2025? He said people laughed at me. But you look where we finished in over points, then you look how we did at the end of last season. I wasn't messing around when I said I think we can run for a championship. A lot goes into it, but the biggest part is consistency, and that's something they know we have. They finished all but 2 races, one mechanical and one, he said, was not sure from Toronto.
He ended up upside down for context.
Yes. I think that if we put that to this year and what we had going into last year, plus the development all went along being under one roof, we're going to be a force. So it's a bold statement. I still think it's very far-fetched, but at least he's sticking to his word.
It is a very Ferrucci thing to say. Like, he's a confident guy. He believes in himself. He believes in his team. And yeah, I mean, he justified it. He said that, I mean, he felt by the end of last season they were pretty nailed to be in the top 10 more or less every weekend as much as any other driver. And I think he was in the top 10 off the top of my head, I think 11 times in the 17 races last season, which was beaten by very few drivers. If I think maybe Alex Palou, Kyle Kirkwood off the top of my head. Not sure about others, but you know, that is about as good a record as any driver in the field. And he now feels that they need to get into that same rhythm, but regularly finishing inside the top 5. And he seems to believe that that's something that's feasible. So good luck to them.
We're on to my favourite one of the day, which will explain why in a little bit. But Kevin Simpson was the next one. Having 5 cars is good because he's got a lot of data, especially at a test. I guess that is very beneficial as a rookie. But it's more focused when you downsize to 3, says to see how it goes over the course of the year. Loves working with Dixon, learned a lot from Bourdais as well. Well, there's no surprises there. 10 championships between them. You'd hope you learn something from drivers with 10 championships. So one thing I asked Kiffin was how he reflects on his rookie season against sort of how he expected it to go. He said he was very happy with it and happy with how he performed in races, and that some of the results didn't actually show for one reason or another. Hopes there could be a bit more consistent, stay out of some unnecessary incidents. Says he had a couple too many crashes, whether it was me making a mistake or was getting into an issue with somebody else. But says if he cleans it up, he'll look good, which is interesting. So I'm glad he actually was happy with his rookie season, which I found quite interesting and just a building blocks towards hopefully a better 2025 for him. He got asked a question about his social media a bit early on, just saying you've been a bit more active. What's going on with that? And he just said, I was just having fun with it, just posting whatever, have something fun to post. It was just quite funny because he was doing that today, making memes about IndyCar Content Day and going through all the doors. He was having a nap and answering questions after his nap, whatever. And one of his big things in recent months, I'd probably say, is pickles and his hatred for pickles. Us actual proper folk call it gherkins, but as he calls them, pickles in the USA, and he's got some wild hatred for pickles. I never really quite understood it, but he's got a wild hatred for pickles. So jokingly, I said to Simpson, can we expect your rivalry of pickles to continue throughout the course of the year? Simpson replied, yes, that's looking to continue throughout the rest of my life, probably, obviously with a smile on his face. Didn't realise this until Archie sent it to me, but pretty much straight away out of the press conference, Simpson tweeted, I got asked about pickles in an official IndyCar press conference. The people responsible for this know who they are. It got even funnier because Simpson has now quote posted, I didn't even realise this, he's now pinned this to his Twitter page as well. So if you ever go on his Twitter, he's now got a graphic of him saying, it's like a quote post format, I'm looking to continue for the rest of my life, Kevin Simpson on the battle against pickles. And has got a crossed up pickle emoji on his on this graphic. So
good. I love that he's kind of come out of his shell a bit like that, because I recall on Content Day last year, obviously coming into his first year in IndyCar as a rookie, he felt quite reserved. And you know, he spoke a lot about the fact that he learned a lot of things on track last year. But I also think he's come out of his shell a bit off the track because he gave not great answers last year. He obviously wasn't that savvy in terms of like dealing with the media. I think this year was, he was offering a lot more, and yeah, he's developing a bit of a fan base through this online presence.
Pickle saga. So all those random Pickles tweets and quote posts that you may have seen on Twitter, it's my fault. I do apologise. I didn't mean to cause such a storm and carry on the Pickle saga. I don't really understand what the argument still is, but yeah, that was probably the funniest thing of the day, that I accidentally caused all these tweets about pickles. So next up, we had Jacob Abel, who was announced. Well, this will probably go out on Wednesday. So we're now speaking Monday is when he got announced to be Dale Coyne Racing's full-time driver for 2025. We spoke to him probably about a month or two ago now. So listen to that if you haven't already.
It was the very start of December we spoke to him. So
just over a month ago. So if you haven't listened to that already, listen to that episode, because he spoke about trying to get a seat. Obviously, it wasn't very clear then what the situation was. It was interesting reflecting on his Indy next season, what he's looking at going forward. Anyway, he's now at Coyne seat. I'll say very well deserved. And he's a good friend of the podcast, as Jacob Abel. So we're very happy for him to get a full-time seat at Dale Coyne Racing after finishing runner-up in the Indy Next Championship, and has been rewarded, as we said, with a full-time seat at Dale Coyne Racing, which he says is a really good seat for sort of development. Because Dale's got that hands-on approach. David Malukas, Alex Pillow, Romain Grosjean in recent years, and he's one for developing young drivers, and that Coyne prides in it. So he's happy at the landing spot he's found himself in.
Yeah, I found it interesting that he actually mentioned Malukas, because Malukas came into the team having, just like Abel, finished as the vice champion in Indy Lights, Indy Next. And look where he is now. He's with AJ Foyt Racing, and a Team Penske drive in the future is possibly on the cards. So it's a great breeding ground for drivers. I'm really happy for Jacob that he's kind of got this reward, because he's been a persistent guy throughout his career. He's, as he spoke to us in depth about, he could very easily have gone to a Juncos or an Andretti or a Cape Motorsports throughout the road to Indy ladder, and one of these teams who are more proven and more kind of set up to win a championship. But instead, he's wanted to stick with Abel Motorsports and build something with his family team, and has essentially been the team leader. And he was asked today about, like, what do you want from your teammate? Because obviously Dale Coyne Racing have not announced the second driver yet. And he said he wants someone with experience that he can kind of lean on and learn from, because that's something that, at least for the last 6-7 years, while he's been in, this more serious part of his single-seater career, he's not really had a teammate to lean on or really learn from, because he's been the lead guy at Abel Motorsports, driving that team forward. But he's now kind of broken free from Abel Motorsports. Obviously, they are still attempting to move up to IndyCar, but the charters have made that difficult. But, I just pushed Abel a bit on kind of what was the timeline of how this happened. And I think he'd mentioned that there were, it was a case of he was trying to balance how often he was calling Dale. And it was actually only within the last week and a half that things really moved to this more advanced phase. But he's really happy with the fact that he's going to get time with the team now with 40 plus days still until St. Pete to really get to know them, really get to bed in and be as best prepared as he can. He said he feels like himself again, because he can now have something to prepare for, tests to prepare for, races to prepare for, rather than going into every day trying to get something sorted, but being this free agent with an uncertain future. So yeah, I'm really happy for him. I think he's always a very eloquent speaker. We saw that when he joined the pod the other week, and he's got a good head on his shoulders, and I think he's got the hallmarks to really succeed, I feel.
Let's round off with the two McLaren drivers. We'll start off with Christian Lundgaard. Obviously, 2 out of 3, because we spoke about O'Ward earlier. One thing I really took away from Lundgaard was speaking about the Indy 500, actually, because he was speaking about having been at the back for the last couple of years, but he's now taking it as a positive because he's learned how to race in the most difficult scenario with the most turbulent air, and he feels confident in his racecraft. So that was something really interesting. He's very confident heading to the 500 because he's got an experience of doing it the most difficult way and going around quite unnoticed. So that was something I took away immediately from Lundgaard.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, you went on to then ask him about kind of how he feels on ovals, because he's obviously going from an RLL team that really struggled in terms of their oval package, and you've not really been able to get a clear sense of how good Lundgaard is on ovals. to an Aaron McLaren team where they have a really good and proven oval package. And I thought, yeah, it was just interesting that he said he absolutely does feel confident to compete at the front, and we've not seen proof of that yet. But maybe those drives through the field at Indy have showcased that. He's very optimistic about his prospects on ovals, but he knows that now is kind of the time to really kind of put that into action and really prove it.
Yeah, so obviously following up on that, he said, but now I think it's a time where I can prove it. Of course, it's a question, but I think ultimately you'll see where we are when we get to May. But he's optimistic and has high hopes of himself. So that was rather interesting. Shut down any Formula One incentives or Formula One involvement with McLaren obviously making that move. Quite a bit about the presence of McLaren as a team and the popularity representing such a brand. He says it's pressure, but he thinks it's fantastic. And especially when you look at the inspiration of what their F1 team has done, and called it a no-brainer to make the move over to Aaron McLaren.
Yeah, I think the only other thing Lundgaard really said was that he knows it could be slightly tough to obviously. I mean, he's switching engine manufacturer for one thing, going from Honda to Chevrolet, but he's just not got that year prior to lean on and learn on, which is why, as you say, he's going to have to use either Rossi or what he'd done at RLL as kind of a reference point. He knows maybe he'll have to adapt his driving style a bit, but that's kind of comes as part and parcel of joining a new team.
And we'll round off with Nolan Siegel, who obviously has been in McLaren for about half a season now. I think it was you asked him about what he thought of his last couple of races. And obviously he was thrown in the deep end, but he feels that he's learned from that because they were the most challenging and difficult moments, and he's in a much better position going to 2025 than he would have been otherwise. So good to go, and hopefully he's obviously wanting a good season ahead.
Yeah, I mean, he also spoke about kind of just this whole experience of being with McLaren. I mean, he could not have expected at the start of last year that he would be ending the season. You know, he had a few races secured with Dale Coyne Racing, but obviously things transpired in a particular way, and he ended up as a McLaren driver by the end of the year. And that meant that he was going to F1 races. He was driving a road car at over 200 miles per hour at the Las Vegas F1 race. And, you know, he was he again kind of shut down the fact that, you know, he's firmly focused on IndyCar. F1 is not in his mind with this whole being a part of the McLaren family. But, you know, he said he would love to race there, but IndyCar is the focus. And yeah, okay, if a test opportunity or a reserve driver opportunity came up, then maybe he'd go for it. But no, his goal is, you know, now he's had that learning and he's built the foundations to possibly target podiums, target wins. I asked him about kind of some of the specific improvements he'd gone through over the off season. He said that, as I've mentioned before, he's gained 15 pounds over the off season, so he's put a lot of work into cope physically, and he's also reviewed all of the races, including from a strategy standpoint, so he can get a kind of better knowledge of how things work strategically. But no, he's aware of the high expectations that come with driving for Aaron McLaren. But as we kind of figured when we spoke to him in the summer, he's very good at blocking out all of the opinions that aren't relevant to him.
New engineer called Kate, who's got a lot of experience, and she's relatively new to the role, which is quite interesting. But he says that having that perspective is a good thing, and it's nice to have someone that's open to experimenting and trying new things and doing things a little bit differently, which I thought was interesting. That was new engineer for Nolan Siegel. And that's all for Content Day 1. This should hopefully be out some point on Wednesday. I don't know when, depends when we edit it, because it is currently 8 to 1 in the morning. It's been a long day, so editing will be done in due course. But obviously a lot to recap. We'll touch on this obviously more throughout the season. We'll do a bit more in-depth reaction to Jacob Abel's announcement of Coyne, maybe a bit more on the Fox booth. But that was obviously recapping what we've heard on day 1 of Content Day. We'll be back tomorrow with 13 more drivers. I will just run through who they are for you, just for your benefit. So we've got Stingo Robb, Ed Carpenter, Jack Harvey, Ryan Hunter, Christian Rasmussen, Connor Daly, Scott McLaughlin, Marcus Armstrong, Callum Ilott, Louis Foster, Joseph Newgarden, Robert Schwartzman, and we'll end off with Rob Power. So a bit of an early run tomorrow, so this might even go out. Tomorrow obviously might even go out Wednesday evening. So we'll see when that comes out, but we'll be back tomorrow. Hopefully you've learned a bit about the drivers and learned a bit about their seasons ahead on day 1 of IndyCar Content Day 2024. We're going to get some sleep, but hopefully we'll catch you tomorrow. So thanks very much for watching, and thanks very much for listening.